My son brought a doctor to my kitchen table to prove I had lost my mind. He had the papers printed. He had a pen lined up next to my coffee. He had a tone of voice he must have practiced in the car, soft and slow. The kind you use on a man you have already decided is not all there. And I sat in my own chair, in the house I paid off 30 years ago, and I let him talk. What my son did not have was one fact. By the time he thought he had me cornered, the company he was trying to take had not legally been mine to lose for 3 years. He just did not know that yet. Neither did the woman he married. So I poured myself more coffee, and I let them keep going. Because the longer they talked, the more I learned about exactly how far they were willing to go. My name is Raymond Keller. I am 63 years old. I live a few miles outside Auburn, Indiana, in a county where most men I know either farm or make parts for somebody who does. I built a precision machine shop from one used lathe and a rented stall, and I ran it for 35 years. If you have driven a truck made in the Midwest in the last 2 decades, there is a fair chance a piece of it passed through my hands first. I am not a man who makes speeches. I do not slam doors. Wherever you are watching this from tonight, I would guess you know the type. The quiet one in the family, the one who pays for things and does not bring it up. I always thought that was strength. For a while there, my son mistook it for weakness. That turned out to be the most expensive mistake he ever made. Let me tell you what I built, because the rest of this only matters if you understand that part. I started Keller Precision in 1989 with $4,000 and a marriage that was 8 months old. My wife, Diane, and I lived in a 1-bedroom over a hardware store. I did the cutting. She did the books at the kitchen table with a calculator and a cigar box for the cash. The first year we cleared almost nothing. The second year I hired one man, a kid named Eddie Soltis, who could not hold down a job anywhere else because he talked too much and showed up too early. He is 60 now and he still works for me, and you will want to remember his name. For 35 years I went in before the sun and I came home after dark. I learned to read a customer's drawing and know what they actually needed, which is a different skill from making what they drew. I missed a lot of dinners. I will not pretend I was a perfect father, but I never missed a payment, never missed a payroll, never once let a man who worked for me wonder if his check would clear. I'll tell you about the winter of 2008, because that's the winter that tells you who I am. When the recession hit, the orders dried up almost overnight. Half the shops in the county closed their doors that year. Good shops, run by good men. And you'd drive past a building that had hummed for 40 years and see nothing but a padlock and a foreclosure notice taped to the glass. I had 11 men on the floor then, and most of them had families. And I knew exactly what was waiting for them out there, because I could see it happening to everybody else. So I sat down at this kitchen table with Diane one night in January, and I told her the only way I saw to keep all 11 men working was to put the house up. A second mortgage on the home we'd paid off, to cover payroll until the orders came back. I told her she had every right to say no. She didn't even let me finish. She got the pen out of the drawer herself, and she signed before I did. We carried that payroll out of our own pocket for 14 months. I did not lose a single employee, not one. And every man who stood on my floor that winter remembered it, and stood by me for the next 15 years because of it. I am prouder of that than of anything else with my name on it. I tell you that so you understand the kind of loyalty a man can earn, and the kind a man can throw away, which is the whole of what comes next. We had one child, Dennis, born in 1991. Smart kid, cool, charming in a way I never was. I put him through college. I gave him a job when he asked for one. And I will be honest with you, I was glad to. I thought he would learn the floor the way I did, from the bottom, with grease under his nails. That is not what happened. Dennis liked the title and the parking spot. He did not like the work. He liked the idea of running a company more than he liked running one. I told myself he was young. I told myself that for a long time. Diane got sick in the spring of 2020. Pancreatic. We had 11 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral. I was holding her hand when she went, in a hospital room in Fort Wayne, on a Tuesday morning. I do not talk about that part much. I will only say that for about a year after, I was not a sharp man. I forgot things. I left the truck running in the driveway once. I called Eddie by my brother's name in a meeting. Grief does that. It is not the same as losing your mind, but it can look like it from a distance, if a person wants it to. Somebody wanted it too. About a year after Diane died, Dennis married a woman named Sloane. I want to be fair to her, so I will tell you the truth as I saw it. She was sharp, sharper than my son. She had a degree in finance and a habit of asking very specific questions about things that were none of her business, like the appraised value of the building and whether the shop carried any debt. The first time I met her, she asked me, over dinner, what my succession plan was. I had buried my wife 4 months earlier. I told her I planned to keep breathing for a while yet. She smiled at that. It was not a warm smile. I found out later that Sloane and Dennis were not doing as well as they looked. They had a house in Carmel they could not really afford, 2 car leases, and a line of credit that was getting away from them. I am not telling you that to be cruel. I am telling you because greed usually has a reason behind it, and the reason is almost always a number that is going the wrong direction. Theirs was... Here is where it started, and I want you to notice how small it was at first. It began with helpfulness. Dennis started showing up at the shop more. He would say, "Dad, let me take that off your plate." He took over signing the smaller checks. He started attending the meetings with the bank. He told the office manager, a good woman named Carol who had been with me 20 years, that going forward she should copy him on everything, so Dad doesn't have to worry about it. Carol called me that night, at home, and said, "Ray, I do not like it." I told her she was being protective. I told her my son was trying to help. Then the comments started, little ones, in front of other people. At a customer lunch, Dennis laughed and said, "Dad's getting forgetful, you know how it is." I had not been forgetful that day. I had disagreed with him about a quote, and that was his way of making my disagreement look like confusion. A few weeks later, at a Sunday dinner, Sloane mentioned, very gently, that she had read an article about early cognitive decline and the warning signs, and she looked right at me when she said it. I changed the subject. I told myself I was being sensitive. But here is the part I had not worked out yet. A man does not lay groundwork like that by accident. Somebody had started building a story, brick by brick, and I was the only one at the table who could not see the wall going up. The thing that woke me up was a piece of paper, and it was Carol who put it in my hand. She came into my office on a Thursday in October, closed the door, and set down a printout. It was a draft of a letter, and it had been left on the shop's shared printer by mistake. It was addressed to a law firm in Indianapolis I had never heard of. It referenced the matter of Raymond Keller's capacity and asked the firm to confirm the process and timeline for a guardianship petition. It listed Dennis as the petitioner, and in the second paragraph, it talked about my increasing inability to manage the affairs of Keller Precision and the need to protect the asset before, and I am quoting this part exactly because I will never forget it, before any further deterioration becomes apparent to clients or the bank. Protect the asset. That was me. I was the asset. And my own son was writing to a lawyer to have me declared incompetent so he could take it. I want to tell you that I exploded. I want to tell you I drove to Carmel that night and put my fist through his front door. I did not. I sat in my office with the door closed until everyone had gone home, and I read that letter 11 times. And somewhere around the 7th or 8th read, the grief that had been sitting on my chest for a year and a half got up and left, and something a lot more useful took its place. Not anger, clarity. Because here is what my son did not know. and what his clever wife had not thought to check. 3 years earlier, 6 months after Diane died, I had done something. I had not done it to protect myself from Dennis. I had done it because I had just watched my wife die in 11 weeks. And I understood, for the first time in my life, that I was not going to be here forever, and that a company is a fragile thing if it depends on one man's signature. So, I sat down with a lawyer, an old friend of mine named Tom Riley, and we restructured the whole thing. Keller Precision no longer belonged to Raymond Keller. It belonged to a holding company, and that holding company was owned by an irrevocable trust. I was the sole trustee, with full control while I was competent. The shares Dennis thought he was circling, the shares he saw on the org chart with my name next to them, were a minority block of non-voting stock I had kept for tax reasons. The voting control, the building, the land it sat on, the equipment, all of it lived inside the trust, and the trust had rules. A successor trustee could only take over if I was declared incompetent by 2 independent physicians of the trust's choosing, not the family's. And any attempt by a beneficiary to force that determination triggered a clause that removed them as a beneficiary entirely. I had written that clause myself, sitting at Tom's conference table, thinking about nothing in particular except that I never wanted anyone to be able to do to me what dying had done to Diane, which is to take away your choices while you are still in the room. I had forgotten I even put it in there. My son was about to remind me. So here is what I decided. Sitting in that dark office, I was not going to confront him. I was not going to warn him. I was going to let him do it. I was going to let him spend his money and his lawyer's hours and his wife's patience building a case against a wall that did not exist. And I was going to be standing there, calm and clear-eyed, when he ran into it. But to do that, I needed 2 things. I needed proof of what they were planning, in their own words, and I needed to make absolutely certain that when the time came, no doctor on earth could call me incompetent. So that is where I started. The first thing I did the next morning was call Tom Riley. I did not tell him on the phone. I drove to his office. Tom is 70 now, mostly retired, and he listened to the whole thing without saying a word. And when I was done, he took off his glasses and said, "Ray, do you understand what they have actually done here? They have not just insulted you. They have stepped on a landmine and they do not know it. All we have to do is not warn them." Indiana is a one-party consent state. That means if I am part of a conversation, I am allowed to record it. Tom confirmed that for me twice, in writing, because I am a careful man, and I did not want a single piece of this to be thrown out later. From that week on, I carried a small recorder, not hidden in any sneaky way, just in my shirt pocket, where I keep my reading glasses. And I started letting my son talk. The second thing I did was the harder thing. I made an appointment with a geriatric specialist in Indianapolis, a doctor with no connection to my family, and I asked her for a full cognitive evaluation. The complete battery. I told her I wanted it documented and dated. She asked me why a man who clearly had his wits about him wanted to pay out of pocket for a test he obviously did not need. And I told her the truth. I told her my son was about to claim I did not have my wits about me, and I wanted the record to exist before he made his move, not after. She looked at me for a long moment and then she said, "Mr. Keller, I have seen this before, and I am sorry." Then she ran the test. I scored in the top range for my age. She signed it, dated it, and sealed it. And I put it in the same drawer at Tom's office where the trust documents lived. Now I had a record that said I was sharp. And I had a recorder in my pocket. And I had a son who could not stop talking. Over the next 2 months, I let it happen around me. I want you to understand what that takes. Every instinct I had said to grab Dennis by the collar and tell him I knew. I did not. I played the part they had written for me. When Dennis said, "Dad, why don't you let me handle the bank meeting?" I said, "Sure, son. My mind has not been what it was." And I watched his eyes light up, because I had just handed him a line he could quote. When Sloane suggested, oh so kindly, that maybe I should not be driving the forklift anymore, I said, "You might be right." And I saw her glance at Dennis. They thought I was folding. I was just gathering rope. The recordings piled up. Dennis on the phone in my own conference room, not knowing I was in the next office, telling someone. The old man signs whatever I put in front of him now. It is just a matter of getting the doctor's letter. Sloane at Thanksgiving, in my kitchen, telling Dennis the lawyer said the cleanest way is to get him declared before the end of the fiscal year, so the audit shows me as non-operational. They talked about me like I was furniture they were arranging to sell. I cooked the turkey that day. I carved it myself, with a very steady hand, and I served them both, and I smiled. There was one afternoon it nearly came apart. Dennis walked into my office without knocking while the recorder was running in my shirt pocket, and he leaned over my desk close enough that I could see him notice the shape of it through the fabric. He stopped talking mid-sentence. He looked at my pocket, then at my face, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I reached up, pulled the recorder out, and set it on the desk between us. And I said, "The doctor in Indianapolis told me to keep voice notes, son, so I do not forget things. My memory, you know." I watched him decide whether to believe me, and because he had already decided I was slipping, because he needed me to be slipping, he believed me. He even patted my shoulder on the way out. That is the thing about a lie you tell about another man. You become the easiest person in the world to fool, because you have already done all the work yourself. I left the recorder on the desk in plain sight every day after that. And not one of them ever thought about it again. There was one night I will tell you about, because I do not want you to think this was easy or that I am made of stone. It was a Sunday in late November. The house was empty, the way it has been empty since Diane. I had the recordings on a laptop in front of me and a glass of bourbon I had not touched. And I listened to my son's voice say, "The old man," for the third or fourth time. And I sat there and I let myself feel it. Not the company, the boy. I taught that boy to ride a bike on the gravel road behind the shop. I held him on my shoulders at the county fair, and he was sitting in a lawyer's office in Indianapolis, using words like non-operational about his father. I did not cry. I am not built for that. But I sat with it until 2 in the morning, and when I finally went up to bed, I knew something I had not known before. I was not doing this to win. I was doing this so that the man Diane married did not go out like a fool. That is a different fuel. It burns cooler and it burns longer. They picked their date, but there was one evening, maybe a week before they filed, when I thought my son might not go through with it. Dennis came to the house alone, which he had not done in a long time. No Sloane. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table, and he did not say much of anything for a while. Then he started, "Dad, he said, and then he stopped. He looked down at his own hands. He looked at the photograph of his mother on the wall behind me, the one from the lake the summer he turned 9. And for about 10 seconds, I watched my actual son sit in that chair. The boy I taught to ride a bike on the gravel road. And I understood that he knew. He knew exactly what he was about to do. And he knew what it was. I did not help him. I could have. I could have said, "Son, whatever the trouble is, sit here and we will fix it, the way we fixed everything when you were small." But I had heard the recordings by then, and there was a part of me that needed to know which man was going to win the argument going on inside him. He sat there a while longer, then he stood up, said it was getting late, and left without ever finishing that sentence. They filed 8 days later. So when people ask me whether Dennis was simply weak or simply cruel, I tell them the truth, which is heavier than either. He was a man who knew better and sat at his father's table and chose it anyway. The petition was filed quietly in early December. I was served at the shop, in front of two of my employees, which I understood was on purpose, to make me look diminished in front of the people who respected me. Eddie Soltis was standing 10 feet away when the process server handed me the envelope. Eddie read the look on my face wrong, the way everyone had been reading me wrong for months, and he came over after and said, "Ray, whatever this is, you say the word and the whole floor walks out with you." I told Eddie to stay put and keep his job. I told him the word was not ready yet. He did not understand. He stayed put anyway. Because in 35 years, he had never once needed to understand my reasons to trust them. Then came the part where I almost lost. The petition triggered a court-ordered evaluation. And here is the thing I had not counted on. The court did not use my doctor. The court appointed its own physician. A man, Dennis's lawyer, had, through some maneuvering I still do not fully understand, gotten some say over. And the appointment was scheduled for a morning right after I had spent 2 nights barely sleeping. Because the hearing date was bearing down, and I am a human being, and I was scared. I want to be honest about that. The week before that evaluation, I was scared. I walked into that appointment running on no sleep and too much coffee. And the doctor was cold, and his questions came fast. And twice I lost the thread of what he was asking and had to ask him to repeat it. I watched him write something down both times. And driving home from that, for about an hour, I believed I had lost. I believed I had outsmarted myself, that I had let them build the whole case and then handed them the one bad morning they needed. I called Tom from a gas station parking lot, and I told him I thought I had blown it. Tom was quiet. And then he said the thing that got me through that night. He said, "Ray, we are not relying on one morning. We never were. We have the recordings. We have your evaluation from September, sealed and dated before they filed a thing. And we have the trust. One bad doctor's note does not beat all 3. Go home and sleep. The move is still ours." He was right, but I did not sleep much. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of December, in the county courthouse, the same building where Diane and I got our marriage license in 1988. Dennis was there in a suit I had probably paid for. Sloane sat behind him in the gallery with a legal pad, like a coach. Their lawyer was a smooth young man from Indianapolis who had clearly never been told that anything was about to go wrong. And I sat next to Tom Riley, an old retired country lawyer in a brown suit. And I watched the other side think they had already won. Their lawyer went first. He laid it all out. The forgetfulness, the forklift, the bank meetings Dennis had quietly taken over. He had Carol on his witness list, which told me he did not know Carol at all, but he never got that far. He painted me as a grieving old man losing his grip, and he asked the court to install Dennis as my guardian and as the operating authority over Keller Precision, to protect the asset. There were those words again. The court's appointed doctor testified that I had seemed fatigued and occasionally disoriented in our one meeting. It sounded bad. Dennis actually turned around and gave Sloane a small nod. I saw it. Then it was Tom's turn, and Tom stood up slowly, the way he does. Before he entered a single document, he called one witness. He called Eddie Soltis. 35 years on my floor, Eddie climbed into that witness box in the only sport coat he owns, the one he keeps for funerals, and Tom asked him plain questions. How many days a week did Raymond Keller run the floor? Everyone. What did Eddie mean by run the floor? And then Eddie explained it, in the flat voice of a man who has never lied in his life because it never once occurred to him to try. He told the court that 3 weeks before that hearing, I had personally programmed and inspected a run of fittings to a tolerance of 2/10,000ths of an inch, and he described, slowly, what that number means. So the room understood it is the kind of work a confused man cannot fake and cannot luck into. He said, In 35 years, I never saw Ray miss a tenth. Not once. Not the week we buried his wife. Not ever. Then Eddie looked over at my son, just for a second, and he said the thing I believe actually turned the judge. He said, "That man knows every machine in that building by the sound it makes with his eyes closed. You do not take a company away from a man like that. You just admit out loud you could never run it yourself." Tom said no further questions. He did not need any. The first thing he entered was a sealed cognitive evaluation performed by a board-certified geriatric specialist on a date I asked the court to note carefully, the 18th of September, 3 months before the petition was filed. Full battery, top range for my age, signed and dated. Tom let the judge read the date himself. The second was audio. Tom asked the court's patience and played, on a small speaker, 2 recordings. Lawful, one-party consent, Indiana, he noted, and entered the legal citation. The room got very quiet. My son's own voice filled that courtroom. The words, "The old man signs whatever I put in front of him now. It is just a matter of getting the doctor's letter." And then Sloane's voice, clear as anything, about getting me declared before the fiscal year so the audit shows me as non-operational. I did not look at Dennis when his voice played. I looked at the judge. But out of the side of my eye I saw my son lower his head, and he kept it down, and he did not lift it again for a long time. I have hated a great many things my son did over those months. I did not hate him in that moment. I knew that posture. It is what a man does when he finally has to sit still and hear himself from the outside. Behind me, in the gallery, the legal pad stopped moving. And the third thing was the trust. Tom handed up the documents and explained them plainly, the way you would explain a thing to a child who has broken something he did not understand. Was load-bearing. Keller Precision, he said, has not been owned by Raymond Keller for over 3 years. It is owned by a holding company, which is owned by an irrevocable trust, of which Mr. Keller is sole trustee. The shares the petitioner believes he is fighting over are a minority, non-voting block. And then Tom read out the clause, the one I had forgotten I wrote. Any beneficiary who attempts to force a determination of incompetency against the trustee in order to assume control shall be removed as a beneficiary, permanently and immediately. Tom set the paper down and said, "Your Honor, the petitioner has not merely failed to take this company. By filing this petition, he has, under the plain terms of the trust, written himself out of it entirely." I have been in a lot of quiet rooms in my life. The shop floor at 5 in the morning, before the machines come on. A hospital room in Fort Wayne, none of them were as quiet as that courtroom. The judge took about 10 minutes. He dismissed the petition. He found me fully competent on the documented evidence. And he said one thing, looking directly at my son, that I will keep for the rest of my days. He said, "Mr. Keller, the elder, appears to be one of the more careful men to come through this court in some time." He said it dry, the way I would have said it. Then he was done. I did not gloat. I want you to understand that. There was nothing in me that wanted to stand over my son and crow. I had buried his mother. I had taught him to ride a bike. Whatever he had become, I made half of him. But the last move was not the courtroom. The courtroom was just where it became visible. The next morning I went to the shop at 5, the way I always have. At 9, Dennis came in. He had no title left to hide behind because the trust did not need him and now legally could not have him. But he still thought there was a conversation to be had. He started in with, "Dad, you have to understand the pressure we were under. Sloane and I were drowning. This was never personal." I let him finish. Then I said the only 3 things I had left to say. And I said them without raising my voice. I told him his employment at Keller Precision was ended, effective that morning, and that Carol had his final check ready, and that I had told her to make it generous, because I am not a small man, and his mother would have wanted it that way. Then I told him the one thing I had decided the night before, lying awake. I told him about the personal loans I had quietly carried for him and Sloane, the ones keeping the house in Carmel afloat. $80-some thousand across 2 notes he had signed and probably never read. I told him that under the terms, I could call every dollar of it due inside 90 days, and that there was nothing he could do to stop me if I did. And then I told him I was not going to. Not $1. Because using money to break a man who is already down is exactly the thing they had tried to do to me. And I was not going to become it just because I had finally won the right to. The notes would stand on their original terms. That was the one thing in the whole business I did purely for myself, so that I could look in the mirror and know the difference between us had held. The last thing I told him was that the door of my house and the door of my shop were both still open to him, that only on the day he could walk through them as my son and not as a man trying to take something. Until that day, they were closed. He said, "You are choosing a company over your own family." I said, "No, you chose a company over your own father. I am just the only one in this room who read the paperwork." Then I went back out to the floor, because Eddie had a part on the big lathe that needed a second set of eyes. And a second set of eyes is a thing I can still provide. That was a year ago. Sloane filed for divorce 4 months later, which told me everything I needed to know about what had actually been holding that marriage together. Dennis sold the house in Carmel on his own, paid down what he owed me ahead of any schedule I ever asked for. And last I heard, he is managing a parts counter up in Fort Wayne, which, and I mean this, is honest work, and more of it than he ever did for me. We are not speaking. But about 2 months ago, an envelope showed up in my mailbox with no letter in it, just a cashier's check for the last of what he owed, and, folded around it, the photograph from the lake, the one of his mother. He had taken it off my wall the day I fired him, and I had not even noticed it gone. He sent it back. No note. I have it on the wall again. I do not know what he meant by it, and I have decided not to ask. Because some doors you leave a little open, and you do not go banging on them to find out why. People ask me if I feel bad about how it ended. I do not. I feel a lot of things about how it started, but the ending was the only fair thing in the whole story. Here is what I will leave you with. Wherever you are watching from tonight, a man can spend his whole life being the quiet one, the one who pays and does not mention it, the one who signs the back of things so other people can stand in front. And the world will mistake that quiet for weakness, right up until the day it needs to be something else. I never raised my voice. I never made a threat. I just did the careful, boring, unglamorous work of knowing exactly what I owned and exactly what I had signed. 3 years before anybody came looking to take it. I am 63 years old. I do not need the last word. I have never needed the last word. I just needed the last move. And it was already mine before they sat down to play. If a man you trusted ever mistook your patience for weakness, tell me about it down in the comments. And tell me where you are watching from tonight. I read them. If this story was worth your time, subscribe, and stay quiet, and stay careful. The careful ones are the ones still standing at the end.